us today. So thank you all. Let's get started, and we'll continue on with this conversation today. But first, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. We would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we are hosting this event on a virtual platform, let's take a moment to acknowledge the stewards and the importance of the lands which we each call home. We acknowledge the land that many of us are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. We also acknowledge that Toronto, where the Insurance Institute of Canada is located, is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in our relationships and to foster our own understanding of Indigenous peoples and their cultures. Please take a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we are and can, each in our own way, move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome. I'm Beverly Lewis Hunt, and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm with Career Connections, a division of the Insurance Institute of Canada. And I'm so pleased to host this phenomenal panel today, spotlighting Indigenous professionals that are just part of some of the companies in the insurance industry. And of course, we had to do this event as part of our celebrations for National Indigenous History Month. And of course, as we lead up to National Indigenous Peoples Day on June 21st, it's going to be a great day. But like all days or other months of celebration, this is really just a start. And this is a conversation between us as friends, as we like to say here today, a really conversation on opinions of these folks that are with us and brave enough to share their stories with us today. Before we start, I'd also like to thank our General Insurance Human Resources Group and their Diversity and Inclusion Working Group for being such active and supportive partners with this series of Voices of Inclusion. Our members have helped us put together this great panel, and which has led to over 240 registrants that have signed up and registered today. So this format for today is going to be a panel, and we're going to end the panel by around 2 o'clock Eastern time. And then we're going to move into some deeper discussions where you'll have an opportunity to talk with our panelists today, and they'll dive into some more deeper discussions. So without further ado, we're going to kick things off, and I'm going to start with some introductions and start with an incredible man who's helped guide this discussion today. And that is Simon Rinaldi, and I'm going to ask him to introduce himself, and that we'll get the rest of the team to follow. Simon?
Excellent. Thanks, Beverly. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session. I am Simon Rinaldi, District Sales and Branch Manager for Federated Insurance. I lead an awesome sales team of commercial insurance specialists and associates for the District of Northern Alberta. I've been in the insurance industry 35 years, I counted the other day, actually 37. If I count the attending McCune University from their insurance and risk management program. I have extensive experience in both sales and underwriting, and including in various management and leadership roles. I've had the pleasure of working with very talented individuals right across Canada, including working in Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto, and now Edmonton. I am a proud status member of the Siksika Nation based in Gleason, Alberta. I was part of the 60 Scoop process that removed more than 20,000 Indigenous children from their homes and families. I have since come to embrace my heritage. I'm a very proud member of the Siksika Nation. I'm also very proud of my great family, a loving wife, 2 great children who I am attending their convocations this week from the University of Alberta. So welcome everybody. I'm excited that you've all joined us. We have an excellent panel, and I know you're going to hear some really good, interesting things today. So welcome. I want to start actually in terms of introducing each individual. So with that in mind, Tracy, can you start our session?
Ani, bonjour. Bobona Nankegwe Indigenous. Nindonjaba, Iskewe. Again. This is a traditional greeting in Anishinaabemowin, so I'll translate it for you. My name is Winter Star Woman, and I am from Iskewazagagan. Unfortunately, that cannot be translated, but my family is Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, from a reserve formerly known as Shoal Lake, number 39 in Northwestern Ontario. I'm known as Tracy Lundstrom. I am the National Broker Enablement Specialist at Gore Mutual, and I've been in the industry for 22 years. I currently reside in Hamilton with my husband, and we have 4 children. I've never been shy about my heritage in the industry or in the workplace, and for the most part, I've been accepted and celebrated. My hope today is that everyone on the call will learn something about Indigenous people that they did not know before and how to be a better ally. And now I'm going to pass it over to Rhea.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Rhea. I'm working at Petline at Definity. So I get the fun insurance with all the cats and dogs. I am Métis. My family comes from the original Red River settlement here near Winnipeg, Manitoba. I'm a very proud Métis woman with a very cool ancestral history that I love to talk about and love to share. And I have a daughter who is 11 years old, and then a dog who likes to think he's more important than her, who's 5 years old, and that's my little family. My hope is that we learn a little bit more about Indigenous cultures today, that we learn from each other and just have a really great conversation that people can take some valuable things away from. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'll turn it over now to Katie.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Katie Plount. I'm a manager at Desjardins. I've been in the industry for about 5 years. I'm a status member of Nipissing First Nation. It's located on the north shore of Lake Nipissing. I grew up in Timmins, Ontario, which is a northeastern town in Ontario. I currently reside in Toronto, but will always consider myself a Northern girl at heart. I, like Rhea, have a dog who is the center of my world. I'm really excited to be here with everyone today and to be able to share my experience and hear from my colleagues as well. My hope for today is that you leave with just one thing, even if it's a small thing that you can take away from the conversation, maybe something you didn't know, something you're curious about and you learned more about, but really just to, be here with everyone and enjoy the experiences and to learn from everyone at the table. I'll pass it over to Lisa.
Thanks, Katie. We were speaking just before we started here, and I said, I get nervous at this point in time introducing myself, and I know my story. So here we go. Just want to let everybody know I am a managing director at Travelers Canada, and I am the great-great-granddaughter of Chwakwe of the West Coast Cowichan tribe. My cultural story is not unique, unfortunately. My great-great-grandma lost her status when she married a white man. Really having that status reinstated for her and our family has been really a journey worth taking. For me, being Indigenous is mending that broken thread and really creating a strong cultural tie for the path forward. My hope for everyone is in listening to the stories that this panel is sharing, that it really validates diversity that exists both above and below the surface, as well as, making sure that we open opportunities to speak to everyone's individual journey.
Great. Thank you so much. for all of those introductions. I think it's going to be a great conversation. We'll each have an opportunity to learn, and just diving a little bit more into the culture. And speaking of which, Rhea, I notice you are wearing a lovely sash. Would you like to just educate us on what you're wearing?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for noticing. So I'm wearing the Métis sash. It's one of the most recognizable symbols of Métis culture and the Métis community. It was originally worn by fur traders and voyageurs back in the 1700s, all the way back to the beginnings of life in Canada. And it was originally worn by the French Canadians and French voyageurs, but in the 1860s, when the Northwest Company and the Hudson's Bay Company combined, it became kind of a normal symbol for all Métis people, and that's what it's become over the years. So just quickly, I'll go over the colors that are included in it as well. So every color means something different. We have red is for the blood of the Métis that was shed. Blue is for the depths of our spirit. White is for the connection to the earth and creator. Blue and white are also the symbolized in our Métis flag. Green is for the fertility of our nation. Yellow is for prosperity. And black is in some Métis scarves. This one does not include it. It's a traditional original Riel sash, but some include the black, which is to commemorate the dark period of suppression in the Métis people during the 1870s.
That's phenomenal. Thank you for sharing that with us. I think we're going to dive into each one of you, some of your career stories. So I'll hand things over to Simon to lead that discussion. Simon?
Thanks, Beverly. So I'm going to ask each of you a question, actually two parts of the question. You've had a chance to sort of introduce as to where you are right now. We were really interested to hear about how you got to where you are in your career at this point. Also, the second part is, what does it look like and feel like to be part of the insurance industry today as someone who identifies as part of the Indigenous community, and also the LGBTQ community? I think it's a really good opportunity to tap on each of you to have some words on this. So I'll start off with Katie.
Perfect. Thanks, Simon. As I mentioned, I'm a manager at Desjardins. I'm in the claims commercial partnership team. Prior to this role, I practiced law. I was in the legal team at Desjardins, and then also I worked at a nuclear power plant for a little while. Getting to my current state in my career definitely was challenging. It took a lot of strength, perseverance, and there were challenges along the way. I grew up in a family that post-secondary education wasn't something that we talked about or something that really was on the table. I kind of found my own way and made my way to university. I had mentors who obviously helped me, but there was no real guidance. I remember I used to call my mom when I was at university saying, "Hey mom, I got to pick some courses. Like, what do you think about X, Y, and Z?" And she's like, "I have no idea what you're talking about. Only you know best." So I think, not having that sort of support and having to find that support throughout my journey, it hasn't only been, in school, but also post that with my careers. Definitely has been difficult, but I will say, and I always reminded myself that one day I'd look back and be proud that I would be here today. And I can say that confidently that, the struggles and the challenges and all the fun stuff that came with that really landed me where I am today. I'm very happy to be in the role I am today. So that's sort of, how I got here. In terms of the how I feel in the industry, I think the word that came to mind for me is lonely. I, like most people, am white passing. I think I don't walk around like screaming that I'm Indigenous and also that I'm a gay woman. That would maybe be easier, but that's not how things go. So I think the word is lonely. There's very few Indigenous people in the industry. There's also very few gay or people that identify with the LGBTQ+ community in the industry as well. So I am thankful for, events like today and for my organization for having platforms that allow us to meet people of our communities and to be able to share as well. So that's my story. I'll pass it on. I think it's Rhea next.
Yes.
Or Lisa. Yeah.
So my original plan was to be a history teacher. I'm one of the lucky ones, I'm sure many of us in here, that kind of fell into insurance and have been in it for 7 years now. I really enjoy what I do. I love my team. We have such a great environment here. Of course, cats and dogs, who doesn't love talking about them all day? So I share a very similar experience to Katie in that I was one of the first people in my families to attend post-secondary. And I can identify with a lot of the challenges that she's faced as well. So I feel very proud to be Indigenous and be where I am now. It motivates me to share my story and to teach others. That's one of my main passions is Indigenous history and talking about our stories. And so it has helped me to be part of our employee groups and subcommittees and lead initiatives, especially during June and September. So that's kind of how I got here and how I feel. I think I will pass it next to Tracy.
Thanks so much, Rhea. Well, I started my career as a licensed insurance agent at Certis Direct Insurance, and I think I was really fortunate to start there because it was a call center that was filled with people from different countries, different cultures, different faiths. So being Indigenous was just another culture to add to the mix. And I used to have a little fun with it too, because as I call it, racially ambiguous, people would ask what my background was and I'd be like, yes, and they never got it, ever. So I've held so many different roles at different companies, but mostly tied to the personal lines underwriting department. Now I work with the broker distribution team as the broker enablement specialist at GORE, and I'm also a proud member of the DEI Council that GORE has created. Our executive team and board have been really strong supporters of the DEI journey that our organization is on. And our CEO, Andy Taylor, actually sought me out after the news of the bodies in Kamloops came out. He wanted to create a group that would identify how GORE could better support the communities around our 2 offices that we had at the time. And while my employers have always been, like every single employer I've worked with, have always been very supportive of knowing that I'm Indigenous, being, celebrating that culture, I still have had a lot of biases and microaggressions that have happened with coworkers and with clients as well. And most of the times I never felt safe to kind of speak up about it. So it never ceases to amaze me how an industry that is mostly done by phone or by email, that people can actually, they have no qualms about saying things that are inherently racist to someone they've never met. So I've been really, really lucky in my journey with my employers. So, and I do appreciate that. And I think I'm passing it over to Lisa.
Thanks so much, Tracy. So I've been in the insurance industry for nearly 25 years. And for those of you counting, it's 175 dog years, okay? So we started at a brokerage, then went to a direct writer, growing and changing all along the way within many different roles. I was really lucky to move across industries, landing in finance, and was a branch manager for TD Bank for nearly 6 years. Some people that know me will laugh at that because I always say I don't speak math, but that's fine. We made it through. But insurance is pretty sexy, is what I always say. And I was lured back about 4 years ago to Travelers Canada, where I'm the managing director for personal insurance operations. So the question, what does it look like to and feel like to be a part of the insurance industry today as someone who identifies as part of the Indigenous community? It's interesting because it's actually, in my previous roles, it wasn't ever something that I connected with or put together or had to connect with or put together. But now with the I think the urgency of understanding cultural differences, it's beginning to be much more top of mind for many different companies across Canada and globally. So for me, it feels like a great responsibility. I'm co-chair of the Indigenous Employee Resource Group here at Travelers. And this responsibility that I feel I'm tasked with is to expand the knowledge of those around me and really help them grow their understanding of the culture. I think those are important points that we need to make, as well as those points that my my fellow panelists have made too.
Great, thanks, Lisa. Really appreciate that. I'll turn it back over to Beverly.
Yeah, and Simon, I think we want also to hear a bit about you and your career journey.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I've had the pleasure of being in this industry, and actually is one of the probably the weird ones that actually researched and went into insurance with my eyes wide open. It's something that I looked at where I was at the time, and I grew up in Kamloops, BC, and I attended the local college there. And I was at a point in my time where I just wanted to maybe explore the world a little more, get away from my hometown, and start something new. And I was very, very fortunate to find out about McEwen and their program. And from graduating from there, as I mentioned earlier, I had the opportunity to start my career in Vancouver in the management training program with Guardian Insurance. Back then the industry was very, very different. And we speak today about the number of Indigenous people in the industry. Well, back then I really couldn't tell you if there was anybody else in the industry that I knew of anyways. It was very different back then. We talked earlier, and I think it was Tracy that mentioned about, things that are said in boardrooms and things that are said during work and around the cooler, and things that unfortunately that I, heard, and quite frankly, I sort of didn't really put my hand up and sort of speak against it. I just wanted to belong. And I think that I now look back and I reflect, maybe I should have taken those opportunities to speak more. But I think what's more important today in terms of this kind of panel and speaking about our experiences, where we grew up, and what we do today is so important. Each of you just spoke about your careers, and your families must be so proud of you. It just brings joy to my ears to hear about what you're doing in the insurance industry, and just continue to do what you do, because it's welcome and it's time.
That's amazing, Simon. And I think when we were talking earlier and prepping for this panel, it was nice to just bring a diverse voice in terms of, years of experience and, diverse thought. And Simon, you certainly have had many years and can bring us back in history a bit. I also wanted to touch base just now that we've gotten your jobs and careers out of the way, but talk a little bit more now about the culture and your feelings about the culture. And starting with you, Rhea, when we talk about stereotypes, we had a discussion earlier about, some things that come to mind for you. Did you want to just elaborate on that?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So I found it very interesting that this group of people have come from different parts of Canada. And when I brought this up, all felt like they identified with this very common stereotype that we've all had to deal with. The idea of sharing your Indigenousness with people can be a very nerve-wracking experience because of stereotypes and bias. But what I found when I started to be more open and more honest with myself and my colleagues about who I am, telling people I'm Métis, telling people I'm Indigenous, the clapbacks that I would get were, well, how Indigenous are you? Or, whoa, do you have your card? So the idea that I have to prove myself in some way as part of the Indigenous community, that I have to validate and authenticate myself as a Métis woman, is very frustrating, and it can be very traumatic, because I feel sometimes the need to kind of like parade the family trauma out to authenticate my experience and my identity. Like, I don't want to have to talk about residential schools in my family tree. I don't want to have to talk about my dad being a 60s scoop survivor. But these are things that it's very commonly asked and very common for me to feel like I have to prove to people that I am indeed an Indigenous person. So I challenge anyone who's ever had those kind of conversations. When someone tells you they're Indigenous, that's it. That's cool. I would love to know more about that. I would love to hear your story. Tell me about your cultures and your traditions. Ask educational type questions. Don't ask someone to validate who they are.
Great. And again, just as a reminder, I invite any questions in the chat that can be discussed later. And for the rest of our panel, because we're touching on so many topics today, if you want to add any comments into the chat for the group that's here today, that would be great. Simon, over to you.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about, and you just mentioned it, Ray, about residential schools and reservations. You know, we all have intergenerational experiences over the years in our families. Certainly, you know, growing up in Kamloops, the horrific uncovering of those children that attended those residential schools. I actually attended a Catholic school, and we had Aboriginal children that were bused across from the reserve to our school each day. And it just was a different time. This is now talking about the late 60s and early 70s. And, you know, even back then, the children that were bused to these schools feeling very alone, you know, and not being accepted, forced to attend. And we all knew, you know, and we sort of avoided that topic altogether. And I look back now on what these children, you know, what they went through with the residential schools and the reservations. You know, you really look back at the history and a dark history, unfortunately, at the time. So, you know, we all sort of have our own experiences. So my question, and I'm going to start with you, Tracy, is how has your heritage shaped the person you are today?
Thanks so much, Simon. I've always known I was Indigenous, like from a young child. All of my family, so all of my cousins, blonde hair, blue-eyed. I knew I was different, but I was okay with it. And that changed as I got older. So as an Indigenous person, for me, especially in Ikwe, so an Indigenous woman, you learn really quickly to stay quiet. You don't tell people. The community I grew up in didn't have a favorable view of Indigenous people. Many families would fly in to the community, or there would be those who were afflicted with addiction in the community, and the locals had a lot of opinions about it. I would also overhear my classmates talking about assaulting somebody who was Indigenous or bullying Indigenous classmates. And I didn't do anything about it because I was scared. So while I spent most of my life running away from all of the stereotypes, trying to be as I said, racially ambiguous as possible, it wasn't until my first job out of school, I worked at a women's shelter, and we had women coming in from all of the fly-in reserves. And that's when I learned about all of what my ancestors endured. And so then I started digging a little bit further. I then found out that my grandfather, as a soldier in World War II, had to give up his Indigenous rights in order to serve our country. Now, we all know that the veterans that come back from war don't get a lot of support. The Indigenous veterans got even less. So that led to a lot of addiction and abuse within our family. His children all suffered for that as well. I suspect that he also attended the Cecilia Jeffrey residential school near Shoal Lake. And those addictions and abuse, it carried on into that next generation. And then my generation as well, we are also dealing with that. So I have half sisters and cousins who are dealing with those issues as well. And then there's a lot of us that are saying, whoa, We need to stop and we need to do better. And so we're teaching our children better, and we are leading them to follow the red path and learn more about our culture.
Great, thank you. I want to also ask Katie to share some thoughts.
Sure. So my grandma grew up unreserved. She was ashamed of being Indigenous, never spoke about it. My family knew that we were Indigenous, but no one ever wanted to talk about it. She was an alcoholic. My mom grew up in an alcoholic household. I was fortunate that my mom didn't drink, so my upbringing was very different. For me, intergenerational trauma experiences, obviously they're different for everyone. For me, I think it's the lack of not knowing what my culture is. I have spent most of my adult life trying to go backwards and, learn about my community, learn our traditions, and reconnect with my community. And so for me, a little bit different than other folks, who have experiences of abuse and alcoholism, just not being able to know my culture and feeling sort of lost in that sense growing up.
Thank you. And finally, Lisa, if you can share some thoughts.
Yeah, for sure. So, thank you, Katie. We had, Katie and I connected last week, and really we have a somewhat similar story. I have always been proud of the link to my heritage, and it continues to shape me each day. And as like Tracy and her grandfather, my great-great-grandmother lost her rights when she married a white man. So it was very easy to be able to cut people off from supports that they needed. I was aghast that any member of my family should be denied rights. And in that realization, I have work to do. I have work to do to go back, to understand more of my culture, to understand what the intergenerational trauma, and to resolve for that in my way, but also how can we prevent that from moving forward? Much like the others have said, the revelation of the graves of children within residential schools, and understanding that the last residential schools closed only in the 90s was unbelievable to me. And I thought, how could this have happened on my watch or in my generation? And it truly told me how much I have to learn, and how much work can be done to educate everybody.
Thanks, Lisa. I think that's honestly a really good segue into talking about truth and reconciliation, because essentially it started with the uncovering of those children's graves in Kamloops, as we all know, and then right across Canada in terms of other institutions. For me, truth and reconciliation, honestly, I can't believe that we're talking about this today. It runs very deep for me. It's very personal. We're celebrating it. It's not only about the past and remembering and honoring, it's also most importantly about the future, and for ourselves, our children, our children's children. And I think that going forward, having this important day is awesome. So I just wanted to maybe tap on you, Katie, to start. Why is it so important, and what does it mean to you to have a Truth and Reconciliation Day?
Thank you. Yeah, I think so. For me, the day, it's not just another statutory holiday. I actually hate that it's called a holiday. I'm fortunate that my company gives us the day, to spend the day observing and remembering the history and the legacy of the residential school system, and also the survivors and their families. We should really spend the day doing local events, educational events, learning about the history, even if that means having conversations with your family and your friends and your community about a topic around residential schools. Read about it, watch documentaries. There's a ton of opportunities out there for you to spend the day. Don't say it's, yay, an extra long weekend because we get to tag the day on. You're sure to, really insult Indigenous people. So really just take the time to know it's not just another holiday. It's actually a day where we should be observing and taking the time to learn about the residential schools and the impact that it's had on the community.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie. Ria, do you have any thoughts on this day?
Yeah, thank you. I live in a province that doesn't have the day off, so we do have to work, but I'm very honored that the pet line, as part of Definity, kind of let me advocate and like followed my lead on this. So far on September 30th, we actually don't do outbound calling for sales on that day out of sign of respect, especially in Manitoba. We have a very large Indigenous population here. So for me, as someone who has school survivors in my family, it's a very personal and very difficult day. So I really appreciate the support of my company in that way. They're doing what they can, but I definitely fully believe that it should be a day off, that it's kind of along the similar lines of a November 11th type thing. It should be a solemn day of remembrance and of coming together to learn so that these things never happen again. One thing that I do always like to bring up when we talk about residential schools and truth and reconciliation is that this is not something that just disappeared when the schools closed. Intergenerational trauma and the policies that were in place that let residential schools happen are still affecting Indigenous people today. So this stat I always kind of pull out is Indigenous people make up 7% of the population of Canada, but we make up 53% of the children in foster care. So it's important for people to realize that truth and reconciliation extends to today, that there are things, there's systematic racism that is happening still to this day. There's children being taken from homes, from hospitals, and all of this started with residential schools. So there's a lot more work to do as a country. And I just want to acknowledge, like, it's not something that disappeared years ago. It's something that is still currently happening.
Thanks, Rhea. So I want to sort of do a little bit of a deeper dive. We talked about yourself being, in the insurance industry. We talked about historically Indigenous professionals have been underrepresented in the industry. What do you think are some of the barriers to having more Indigenous people in the industry? What can the insurance industry do to attract more Indigenous professionals? What can companies do? Maybe perhaps your own company that has, participated in initiatives to reach out to maybe Indigenous youth or career seekers. Any strategies they've implemented to counteract that kind of challenge? So I'm going to start with Lisa, if you could speak to this.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Simon. So, one of the first barriers that comes to mind is actually one that we, I think it was Rhea spoke to earlier, and that's being stereotypes. And so I think that, people need to get over that, to understand that we're all people. We want to learn. We have hopes and dreams and so on. But I don't want to spend too much time on barriers, because there's so much opportunity to engage any diverse group in our industry. And there are many levels to which to do it. So, there are travelers is engaging a lot with regards to recruitment, making sure that we are at colleges, universities, in populated areas that are populated by Indigenous peoples. I'm speaking for many companies that offer fulsome training as well as financial assistance for things like CIP designation, risk management courses, and so on. Ours is an industry that doesn't necessarily mean you need to have college or university. And really, we have to make sure that we're engaging on all levels. High schools, we need to get in at that level to be able to connect through volunteering with supportive organizations. We don't just need recruitment, we need sponsorship, we need advocacy, and we need mentorship. What can we do to help? How can we get in on that level to be able to find the people and have the people find us who want to grow and change? I think there's a huge amount of opportunity there, and I look forward to carrying that down.
Awesome, thanks, Lisa. Some really good points. Katie, can I tap on you to speak?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. I think something that's important to keep in mind too is each community is different. So the needs are different. Some communities are much more remote than other communities. And so that creates a barrier as well. In terms of what we could do, I think, we'd have to tackle it sort of at the community level in terms of high school, as Lisa has said. Often folks don't even get past high school because we don't have the resources and the support to finish high school, let alone attend post-secondary education. So gearing, some sort of program, maybe it's a summer program where we work with the local communities and the local schools to find folks that are Indigenous and that can come work for our companies. I think that would be a great start. And then you can build them up in terms of within the company and move on to bigger roles.
Excellent. Thanks, Katie. I'll turn it back over to Beverly.
Great, thanks, Simon. And I wanted to kind of continue that conversation, Lisa, with you in terms of, the work that your company does as we turn this discussion to a bit about allyship, which is an important theme in our Voices of Inclusion series. You mentioned you're the co-chair of the Travelers and Indigenous Employees Resource Group. And could you explain to us what role it plays and the importance of allyship, specifically at your company?
For sure, absolutely. Thanks, Bev. Our Travelers has a significant diversity network internationally, and of those diversity networks, we are included as the Indigenous Employee Resource Group. Our group now comes together once a month or once every couple of weeks as we get closer to September. But really what we're focused on is educate, educate, educate. We take all comers and we're being very intentional about what the employee population needs. Our ERG is working hard to make sure we're not only engaging in our own affinity activities, so we look to September as our affinity month, but also looking at things like intersectionality. So intersectionality, and I believe that Katie spoke to it earlier, is, how can we get on board with other diversity networks to be able to promote a message that is clear for those other groups? So LGBTQ, this month we are celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day on the 21st with our Pride partners and having we're co-hosting a conversation about Two-Spirit. So much is happening in the Pride space and in the Indigenous space. It just makes sense to come together to do that. So really, we have our allyship in the workplace and community is so important. It's important to make sure that people feel comfortable to be able to identify who they are and come to work as their authentic self. And those are some of the things that Travelers is doing. I could not be more proud to work for the company that I am. So there's my plug. But they're an amazing group, and we're absolutely growing our diversity networks and inclusion.
That's amazing. And I think, part of this conversation is also having other companies follow your lead, get ideas and how they can engage. Teresa, you had mentioned that your company, and you as being part of your ERG, they've taken on a number of initiatives.
Absolutely. Yeah, our DI council was carefully selected to have people from different backgrounds, but also from different business units to make sure that everybody's voice is being heard and that we're getting a great representation across the organization. Together we've been discussing, making decisions around cultural celebrations, which ones do we want to highlight this year's, which one do we want to highlight next year. And we're also, we also like to have guest speakers on as well that can help us speak on a variety of topics so that we can always learn and grow as a council and then move forward and grow as an organization as well. Each one of our participants will participate in land acknowledgements within our meeting, but then also within celebrations of, company-wide. And our next project is now going to be joining other business units. So I have to go speak to one of the other business units and just share some of the DEI initiatives that are happening. So our council's mandate is actually only to have this group of people for 2 years. and then another group will come in for another 2 years. And that way we always keep it fresh, and there's new ideas and new things coming up all the time, which is amazing. You mentioned, Beverly, that some of the organizations have not kind of started their DEI journey, and that's okay. And if they're looking at starting something, then start exploring some of the groups that you can join to learn more about the DEI journey. There's a lot out there. We've tied in with the CCDI, and I've been to a couple, like a workshop there. It's amazing. There's a lot of information. You meet some great people. And a lot of the work is so rewarding. I know even our own council, the growth within our council itself is absolutely astounding. We all walked in not knowing what to expect, and we're all walking out of this at the end of the year having a better understanding and also being a very close-knit group. So it's a very rewarding, and it doesn't matter where you are in your journey, it's important work to do.
Thank you so much for that. Simon, how about I pass it over to you to close things out?
Absolutely. Thanks, Beverly. So we talked about a wide array of different topics and things, and really shared our thoughts about these important items. I want to sort of talk about now the hope for the future, because I think that's extremely important. I'm going to ask each of you to share your thoughts on what does the future, what does may hold for Indigenous youth and future generations, and not only in insurance. What change do we hope to foster and grow from, and what does the future look like for an Indigenous professional, a tradesperson, any field they choose to get into? I'm going to start off with Katie.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah, I still think we have, a long road ahead of us. I don't like to say that, but I think that's the reality that we're dealing with today. I think the future needs to recognize our tremendous diversity. We need to have our values included in anything future-wise. It has to be grounded in meaningful partnership with our community. I do want to believe that the future for Indigenous youth and for future generations to come is hopeful, but I think we're going to need some allies as well to, speak for us, advocate for us when we're not at the table, get us at the table, especially when we can't advocate for ourselves. And that's oftentimes the case. So really relying on some allyship as well. I think that's what our future looks like.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie. Rhea.
Thanks. So for me, having a daughter, I hope to see future generations empowered in so many ways. I see her connecting with our heritage in different situations. She's doing the fiddle, which is very, very Métis, and jig classes, and she's learning so many cool things that I just never had the opportunity to. And these are all coming from school. So I think that there's this really amazing movement happening of reconnecting with Indigenous culture that we're seeing. As many of us have talked about on the panel today, it wasn't something, not everyone grew up with it. So there's a lot of discovery that's happening within our community at any age. So my hope is to see a lot more empowerment and a lot more engagement with our heritage, our roots, and then to be able to share with our allies. I think the more we plug in, the more we're able to share and open up our community to everyone. And I hope that brings more representation in all industries. As Katie said earlier, you're kind of a solo act sometimes. So I hope that there's a lot more people who engage and feel confident and feel capable of, whether it's post-secondary, whether it's insurance, whether it's trades, whatever it is. I want to see the next generation feel like they can do anything that they want.
Excellent. Thanks, Rhea. Lisa.
Thanks again, Simon. So, I think my personal mandate is really to continue to educate myself and at the same time engage those around me to embrace Indigenous culture in any way. It needs to go beyond 1 or 2 days a year and land acknowledgement. We get wrapped up in those 3 things, but and they are great things to celebrate or acknowledge. There are also so many day-to-day things that we need to understand. I encourage everyone to look for ways to support, mentor, and grow allyship for not only the Indigenous and diversity, but for all diversity.
Thanks, Lisa. And Tracy.
Thanks, Simon. We talk about allyship and making sure that we're at the table, and that is the most important part. The other thing I want to bring forward is listen. We are all storytellers. We love to tell stories, and we'll tell you our story if you make it a safe place for us to do so. So making sure that we are allowed to tell our stories, that we're safe to do so, give us that seat at that table. But the future of our Indigenous youth, my daughter's at Trent University right now doing Indigenous studies, and I gotta get this right because she'll give me heck, but she wants to teach Indigenous studies and environmental sciences. So this generation is fearless. They are vocal, and they are going to change the world. And we just need to make sure that we amplify their voices.
Excellent. Thanks, Tracy. Awesome thoughts, everybody. For me, and you mentioned it, the next generation. I mean, I have two daughters, as I mentioned earlier, graduating this week. I'm so proud of them. They also are proud members of the Siksika Nation. Allyship. I know in talking to a lot of business owners and people involved in various the businesses that we insure, they talk about starting programs, they talk about scholarships, they talk about these things, and it's just awesome to hear the future. I listened to a broadcast and it was interviews through CBC on some Aboriginal youth. They talked about the future, and they were so positive. They really wanted to get their message out that we are here, we are capable, we are competent, we are the future, and we want to take it on. And they, yes, we laugh, yes, we have all these, we have everything that everybody else has, and we want to engage, and we look forward to the future. And I think all of us in our positions, in our leadership, and what we do today is so important. So my hope is that for the future we continue along this path. We see more Indigenous people in the insurance industry, or whatever industry they choose to get in. And I'm excited to see what happens. It's come a long way, and thank you, everybody. Thank you, Beverly, for asking me to join, and I'll pass it back over to you, Beverly.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. All of your words were really so inspiring, and I think just being hopeful for the future is always important for all of us. So thank you once